Today, we begin with an assessment that economists had whispered, analysts have feared, and financial experts had quietly documented for months. A verdict that unfolded not over decades, but in 4 short years. For years that transformed American prosperity. For years that hollowed out the middle class. For years that left working families struggling to survive. What the Biden administration did to this economy crossed a line that fiscal conservatives had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the numbers did not lie. They responded with clarity, precision, and devastating honesty. For years now, there have been warning signs. Not from partisan sources, not from political opponents, just raw economic data, that the Biden administration was creating something deeply troubling. The administration has been optimistic, yes, but they have been selective in their optimism. Their messaging followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a script. But what set off alarm bells on Wall Street this week was that the spin went silent. Economists who monitor fiscal health know the indicators. The rising consumer debt levels the shrinking savings rates, the persistent inflation eating away at wages, the sudden increase in credit card delinquencies. All of that was building quietly. And whenever economic pressure builds silently, it means something is about to break through loudly. Earlier this week, leading economists released what they described as a comprehensive post-administration economic assessment, including data points that had not been publicly analyzed in over a decade. These are the kinds of metrics that experts only examine when they are signaling something very specific: systemic weakness, structural damage, or long-term decline. Analysts didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that the economy had fundamentally changed. And when an economy shifts trajectory without acknowledgement, even by small measures, every financial institution pays attention. The assessment issued by economists this week was not normal. It was not routine. It was not academic. It was alarming. Expert after expert described the Biden economy as artificially inflated, fundamentally unstable, and, perhaps most importantly, unsustainable without massive intervention. But economic spin only works if the public doesn't see the data. The American people did see it. In fact, their response to the ballot box was among the most decisive we've seen in modern political history. Here's what we know. Within months of experiencing peak inflation, voters began shifting dramatically. These weren't the usual swing voters. These were lifelong Democrats, working-class families that the party had counted on for generations. This week, financial analysts confirmed that the Biden administration oversaw deterioration in key economic sectors, including manufacturing bases that had recently been recovering after Trump-era trade policies. The damage spread before corrective measures could take hold. It hit household budgets. It hit small businesses. It hit retirement accounts that were supposed to fund Americans' golden years. In other words, the policies targeted the economic foundation of middle America, the stability that would have made recovery sustainable. This is what made economists' warnings so urgent. Biden's economic approach wasn't just misguided, it was destructive. It represented the kind of policy framework that could cripple generations if left unchecked. And voters, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't blame external factors. They didn't accept excuses about global conditions. They identified the source of their pain. They voted accordingly. And here's where the story becomes even more revealing. Economists now believe that the administration's policies were designed to prioritize short-term political gains over long-term economic health. Biden's team wanted to see whether Americans would accept declining living standards. But instead, the opposite happened. Voters didn't accept the new normal. They rejected it so completely, so decisively, that even Democratic strategists noticed. You don't get Washington's attention easily. But this election, American workers did. Financial analysts speaking with media under anonymity described the administration's approach as economic gaslighting, a way to maintain power while conditions deteriorated. But American families proved they remained both aware and engaged. Their votes were not only significant, they were targeted so precisely that key swing states flipped dramatically. That shift matters because it shows economic issues override cultural messaging. It shows that voters are not passive observers. They are active participants in holding leaders accountable. As reports continued coming in throughout the week, we learned more about the scale of economic damage. Inflation eroded purchasing power by over 15%, forcing families to choose between groceries and medicine. Housing costs exploded to record levels that had been manageable just 4 years prior. Energy prices, driven by policy decisions, reportedly doubled costs for heating and transportation. This wasn't just an economic downer. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was systematic deterioration. This was policy-driven decline. And policy-driven decline is the one thing administrations have struggled to defend since voters started feeling it directly. For every positive jobs report they celebrated, working families countered with something that told a real story: empty wallets. Remember, the Biden administration thought Americans wouldn't notice inflation. They thought voters would blame corporations. They thought Bidenomics would become a winning message. But today, the exact opposite has happened. Americans noticed every price increase. Voters blamed the policies that caused them. Bidenomics became a punchline. What makes this moment so significant and so consequential is that the economic verdict arrived at a time when the Democratic Party is under existential pressure. Progressives want more government spending. Moderates want fiscal responsibility. Unions want protectionism. Donors want stability. Party leadership is balancing these demands while processing a devastating electoral loss. And when parties in that position make sudden pivots, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from desperation. The Economist assessment, now circulating widely, was designed to signal that experts are not willing to let revisionist history take hold. Analysts said plainly that Biden's economic management was inconsistent with sustainable growth. That is academic language for these policies made things worse. You don't usually hear that tone from mainstream economists unless something serious has occurred. Meanwhile, the lead economist addressed media in a measured, data-driven statement this week. He said, "We inherited metrics that told a clear story." He said, "The American consumer was stretched beyond breaking point." And he said, "This wasn't bad luck. This was bad policy. These are not partisan attacks. These are conclusions from experts who understand just how severe the damage has become." As the weeks go on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly the Biden administration hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that the Economist's assessment was timely. It validated what families experienced. It documented what politicians denied. And it provided a foundation for understanding what went wrong. What happens next will depend on what the new administration does in the coming months. If they reverse course, this moment will be remembered as a turning point. If they continue failed policies, American voters have already shown they are paying attention. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in 4 years, working Americans appear to be heard. Washington is recalculating, quietly recalculating. And when Washington goes quiet, it means they are processing. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because this week, politicians learned something they should have known all along. You cannot spin grocery prices. You cannot gaslight gas stations. And you cannot hide a sick economy from the people living in it. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The verdict is in. The data doesn't lie. And the American people have spoken. And we will be here, watching every detail as the recovery phase unfolds.